I'm Hal Gershenson. I'm sort of the coordinator for the general meetings, and I'm a member of the steering committee of Blue CD2. And we have a very exciting program tonight. But before we begin, we always like to introduce ourselves because there's so many people, we don't do it live, but we like to do a land acknowledgement as we all recognize that we have come to these lands and people have lived here long, long before us. So if you know which of the indigenous peoples were living where you live now, you can acknowledge that in our chat. And I will take a second to do that myself. And where you're from. A couple of announcements. For those of you who are members of our postcard team, it's happening. We'll have the postcards to you within the next couple of weeks, and right after the 4th of July break. We hope your wrists are in shape and your pens are ready. And our first postcard's going out. And then there'll be another one for you guys to work on later in the summer or early fall. And then there'll be 3 that are mailed out by our postcarding team, by our mail house directly without personal messages. That'll happen over the course of this year. We're excited about that. I'm also curious, we could use some help if anybody was ever in the insurance business. Please let me know in the chat because we want to get some insurance. So if you know more about insurance than I do, because it's my task to find it, please let me know. And then Rochelle, you wanted to speak a little bit.
I just want to say a couple of things, and I know that everyone is eager to do as much as we can to publicly protest. And there's I feel a lot of interest in that. I want to reiterate that Blue CD2 is focused on electoral politics. That's what we've done since the beginning. And it is another way to protest. So I don't want you to feel like you're not protesting when you're engaged in our projects, in all the things that we do, the postcards and texting and programmatic ads and raising funds and keeping the website up to date with information to get out to people who need to know it. So yeah, that I just wanted to say that this is everything that we do is a kind of protest now. So keep joining us, please, to do that. It's really important. And I guess what I'm saying is don't give up on the electoral side. I hear a lot of things about how we're not going to have elections next year, or they won't be free and fair elections. We can't predict the future, but we can do our work and everything in our power to make sure that we get Gabe reelected and elect other Democrats. Anyway, thank you. That's all.
Okay. And did you want to talk a little bit about the fundraiser too?
Oh, yes. We have our first fundraiser coming up July 1st, and it's going to be about the theme is the government is us. We are the government. Your postal carrier, your local hospital, the roads that you drive on, the people who maintain those roads. You know, we hear from the other side about the deep state and how civil servants are part of that, and we know that we need the government. It's how we support each other and do things that we can't do alone. So that's the topic of the fundraiser, and we have 2 wonderful speakers, Antonia Scatton, who writes Reframing America. It's a messaging Substack, and Lucian Truscott IV. I think most of you probably have heard of these names. They both publish Substack newsletters, and they talk a lot about how we need to speak about democracy and what we need to do. to keep our democracy. So please join us for that, July 1st. And I think it's from 5 to 6. Does anybody have that in front of them? And it'll be on Zoom, of course.
It's from 6 to 7.
6 to 7. Okay. Anyway, glad to see you all here. Thank you.
I just put a link to the register page in the chat. If you want to register, feel free.
Great.
Okay, so I don't see that Amanda is here.
So I just texted with her actually, and her Zoom was updating. So she is coming, but I don't know if we want to wait or if we want.
No, why don't we start with you? Why don't we start with you, Michelle? Okay,
Okay.
just because we try and keep on time. We are really excited to have Michelle Mayorga with us. She is a pollster. She is somebody who tries to figure out what's going on around the state, and she's a partner in a group called GBAO, and she really specializes in Latino public opinion and holds focus groups. She's done it all around the country. She's worked for Ben Ray. She's worked for Teresa. In Arizona, she worked for Reuben Gallego, and lots of other politicians who are on the national stage, as well as many local politicians in New Mexico. She does live here in Albuquerque, but she is part of a nationwide firm. And so she's done focus groups on everything from reproductive rights to crime, to policing, and like I say, in states all across the country. So, we're just really excited to have her here to give us some insights about how we think about New Mexico and how we think about messaging in New Mexico. So take it away, Michelle.
Absolutely. So I have a little bit of a presentation, which I'm sure is not a total surprise to anybody, because I think everything I'm sharing is public information, but just to sort of level set, and then we could get into messaging from there. But if I could be allowed to share, I can pull up my quick PowerPoint. I can send a request.
Okay.
Okay, I can share. Hooray. Okay. I'll share this. And hopefully everybody can see this. So this is just sort of I did a little bit of research, a little bit of a deep dive on New Mexico 2. So again, I'm sure that you all have been over this. This is what you all do. But just so we're all sort of talking from the same page here. I just took a look at the registered voters in the district. So you can see overall Anglos make up 44% of registered voters, but they overperform and make up about half of the electorate in the district, about 50%. You can see in 2022, they were 55%, the sort of high water mark there. And then the Latino voters make up about 50% of registered voters, but underperform a little bit and are about 45% of the electorate. So there's certainly room to grow with Latino voters in the district, if that's what we wanted to do. But just a note there. And then this is probably the only thing that I've put in here that is not like public information. We do look at past performance to try to determine or make a best guess about future performance. So this is our best guess at this point, taking into consideration sort of past performance and the political landscape in terms of 2026 demographics. This could end up changing, but so take it with a grain of salt. But for this moment, for this discussion, it is not that different in terms of like what the demographics of the electorate in the district. So this is not the population of the district, but what the actual sort of turnout electorate would look like. And you can see it is about half Anglo, about 45% Hispanic. We just sort of saw that, about 3% Native American. It is an older electorate, over half over 50, and about 44% Democrat, which is a little more than we saw in 2024, which is good news. We do expect, the midterm elections recently have been sort of better for Democrats than presidential elections. It used to be that presidential elections were sort of better for Democrats because you got higher turnout, but in recent years, we've sort of seen a shift away from that. This is party registration over time. Take this with a little bit of a grain of salt because of redistricting, but I think the basic point here, or the point I want to just make sure we're keeping in mind, is that the decline to state, the other category, has been growing, and we've seen this across New Mexico, across the state, and also here in CD2. The Republican registration is pretty stagnant. The Democratic registration moves a little bit, and it's really going towards, we see that movement towards a sort of decline to state other. And so we're seeing a really growing, what I would call like a persuasion universe, like a universe of people who are not identifying with either party. Okay, so this is just looking back at 2022 versus 2024. It was a very even district. Looking back at 2022, the governor was down one, and obviously Gabe won by 0.6%, like, thank God. And then looking at 2024, a little bit more solid for at least New Mexico Democrats. So this is a point I'm going to be making a lot, is that sort of New Mexico candidates who can sort of keep to issues in New Mexico sort of fare better. You can see the presidential was down 2, the Senate was at 52%, Congress was at 52%, really similar there for the sort of like New Mexico candidates. This is just looking at the Bernalillo portion of CD2, looking at 2022 versus 2024. In terms of the governor's race, you can see the congressional race outperformed the governor's race in the sort of Bernalillo portion, which is like the South Valley and parts of the West Side. I'm sure you all know that. And then, we saw that in the Senate race also sort of stayed right around 59%. We'll see how it goes this cycle, but that is sort of like it seems like what we can expect out of that area of the district. And then this is the CD2 portion of Valencia County, again, comparing 2022 and 2024. Again, the congressional race looks pretty similar both times, although, lost by a little less. Losing by less is sometimes like the best thing a candidate can do in terms of like building up a win. So, instead of losing by 10, losing by 8, and certainly overperforming the presidential, where you can see Harris lost that portion of Valencia County by 14. So very hard to do, to overperform the top of the ticket. And that was something they did very successfully here, or you all did very successfully here. Okay, let's look at Doña Ana County. And hi, Amanda, I saw you on. So, I will talk about Doña Ana County in front of the clerk of Doña Ana County. So looking at the presidential, just the presidential over time in Doña Ana, it has actually stayed pretty steady. There's a high watermark in 2020, but Democrats are getting anywhere from 54 to 59% in Doña Ana, which is good news. It was a little lower in terms of, it was closer. So Harris in 2024 only won by 10 points, where Biden in 2020 won by 19 points. So we do see some difference there, but otherwise relatively steady. And then looking at the Senate over time, it's also pretty similar. There are some counties in New Mexico, this is not one of them, where we do see big differences sort of between the presidential and the Senate race. And so we wanted to take a look at that. But this holds pretty steady in Doña Ana over time. And this is the governor also in Doña Ana over time. Interestingly, when Susana Martinez was on the ballot, so a local, you know, candidate. It was much closer, and she actually won it in 2014. And then Democrats have gone back to winning it. But it is something I think we should note in terms of, you know, if they're that a Southern-based Republican can do well in Doniana, and you know, we'll see who ends up running in the congressional race. But it is, I think, an important note just to know and understand there. And then this is looking at the House race over time. In Doniana, there's a high water mark in 2018. That's true across the board, across the country. 2018 was a high water mark for Democrats in general. You know, I think this was Soch in 2018, if I remember correctly, Representative Torres Small, you know, won it by 30 points, but we're still seeing sort of solid wins for Democrats in 2024. Representative Vasquez won it by 16 points, so still very solid, but certainly there is room there. You know, there's a high water mark that I like to give myself a challenge and try to hit those high water marks, but obviously very high performing. This is looking at Otero County over time. The presidential there, again, sometimes losing by less can be what really helps you build a lead. So, you know, the difference between a Democrat getting, you know, 31 and losing by 29 points and getting 35 and losing by 27 points is, you know, 2 points that we need in a very, very close district. And we see the Senate race actually has a bit of a high water mark in 2024 with 39%. Heinrich did pretty well in Otero County. And the governor's race over time is, you know, a little, it's similar, lower in, you know, the Susana Martinez years, again, a local candidate running who had been elected in the area before. And then this is looking at the House race. 39%, 40% being the high water mark in 2018, but got very close to that in 2024 in Otero. And that's just pretty much what I had. But so basically my point is, in terms of messaging, is that, you know, we see sort of local New Mexico candidates sort of doing better and being the high water mark. And what we really want, I think, is to localize the messaging as much as possible. The less that this can be about, you know, sort of Democrats and Republicans, sort of the better, because I think people really want to know that their representatives understand them and understand New Mexico. And, you know, getting into that sort of bigger battle. I mean, we saw Harris as sort of the low water mark, right? I keep talking about the high water mark as sort of the low mark. So as much as we can keep messaging sort of local and relevant to people's real experiences in New Mexico is where I would sort of keep it. But I'm happy to like take specific questions about messaging or get deeper into that.
Yeah. Just to start us off, can you talk about differences within the Hispanic population? We know it's very complex in New Mexico, as we all know, between North and South, between generations. And can you talk about how that plays out in elections?
Absolutely. So one thing that is important to note is sort of newer voters, newer Americans to voting. We see some of this in Otero County, especially, tend to be a little bit more Democratic than sort of people who've been here longer and are more assimilated. So that is good news. It also tends to be that those areas have lower turnout. And so, you know, I would think we would need to like focus on messaging and turnout sort of in those Latino areas, especially, which is not to say that we don't want to turn out other Latino areas, but just that I would be keeping that in mind as we get, you know, closer to election day. And And then, this is also a border community, which I spent a lot of time telling people that like Latinos' #1 issue is the economy. And like everybody thinks that immigration is a Latino issue, but like they really care about the economy. And that is true. But we are talking about sort of border communities here, particularly in sort of Doña Ana County and stuff. So it is sort of a more relevant topic, I would say, in the southern parts of this district than sort of the rest of New Mexico. So I would keep that in mind. And then, there are two really big pockets of votes here, and that is Doña Ana County and Bernalillo County, and they're wildly different. They're like 4 hours apart and totally different populations. So I'd say keeping that in mind as well as we sort of think about the Latino populations.
Yeah. So how would you describe the difference between the Bernalillo population and the Doña Ana?
Sure. So I think that again, the Doña Ana population is actually probably a little more diverse than the sort of South Valley population in Bernalillo. And we see sort of more newer Americans there, whereas in the South Valley, people's families have been there for generations, which is also true in Doña Ana, but it's just that there has been a little bit more more people coming in. And then, I think in the South, there are more issues in terms of, one, immigration, but also like extreme heat. Like, not that they don't get extreme heat in Bernalillo, but I think that is like more of an issue down south. And in terms of like, and we saw the voting population is older in the district, and extreme heat can really affect older people especially. And so that is something that's like, I think, really relevant down there. And then, in water issues we have everywhere, but especially sort of outside of Bernalillo County. And then thinking about the population in Bernalillo, they are outside of Albuquerque, but they, how do I explain how, they're a little bit rural in that there is sort of more land and there are more farms there, but they do sort of have access to Albuquerque. And so sort of the idea of, people in Las Cruces obviously are in a city and an urban setting, and the South Valley is like a little bit more ex-urban as well.
Mm-hmm. Just, some people are beginning to raise their hands, but I'm just fascinated by this heat thing, because that is something that we as a group have never talked about. It's never, crossed our minds. So so how does that issue play out politically or in terms of messaging?
Yeah, so I think what it really affects people in terms of messaging is, cooling bills in the summer in a place like Las Cruces or in southern New Mexico can be unaffordable, right? And so you find people either turning off their AC or keeping their houses warmer, which can be dangerous, just depending on how hot it is. And we need affordable utilities, essentially, is the issue, or we need to be helping people with their utility bills so that they can stay safe in the summer.
And have local candidates run on that issue before? Or is this something kind of new?
No, well, not here, or at least I haven't seen it here. I'm sure it's maybe come up, but I have seen it in Arizona where it gets like much, much hotter, where it's 117 degrees in Phoenix all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But it is something that I have heard from people in focus groups, and anybody who's been to Las Cruces can tell you, been door knocking in Las Cruces can tell you how hot it is. So I think it is something that would translate. And it's something you see in Tucson also that people talk about. So
Fascinating, interesting. Constance, did you have a question?
I did, actually.
And everybody else, raise your hands.
I'm the co-chair of Blue City 2, and it so happens my background is in marketing. And we have been trying all kinds of different tactics to reach the Hispanic population, including last year, we did a series of postcards that were in Spanglish. And we're kind of feeling around to trying to decide should we just use the Spanish language itself? Should we try Spanglish again? What works? How should we approach this? Because we've been told a lot of young Hispanics actually prefer English as their first language. They don't really speak that much Spanish.
Right. Yes, and I think, you know, a lot of people who are new citizens have to show, you know, proficiency in English. And so while there are people who are Spanish dominant, I think Spanglish is the right way to go. Like you want to, you know, demonstrate that, sort of understand that people are Spanish speaking, or maybe they speak Spanish at home, but they will, for the most part, in terms of an electorate and people who are voting, there will be like a greater understanding of English, which is not to say that's everybody, but I think Spanglish, if you can get the point across and do it in one, I think that's good. The other thing that we've seen in polling is that YouTube is very popular with Latino populations. So to the extent that you could have a YouTube channel or something like that as well, I think that would be really
Yeah,
helpful.
we have one, but it's pretty, it's lame. It's mainly our meetings that we put up so that we can give people access to them.
And so would you do the YouTube in Spanish and English or somebody who's kind of a Spanglishy kind of
Yeah, I would do it all. Yes.
do it all, do it all.
Well, that's really helpful because we also had a very positive feedback about the Spanglish from a consultant we've been using who lives in Anthony. And he said the same thing. He thought Spanglish would be best received. But we've had a few, I suspect, English speakers who've come back and said, hoof, Spanish. But I think pretty much, this is my impression, I've only been in this state for 6 years, but most people speak enough Spanish or enough English to be able to figure out what the message is. So that's good to hear. Thank you.
Exactly. And if your message is so complicated that, you know, you can't get it across with the Spanglish, then we probably need to rethink the
Yeah,
message.
exactly.
Oh, good point. Very, 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 very good point. Now you were talking when we were talking about, you know, Bernalillo compared to Doña Ana, you were really talking about more like South Valley and rural Bernalillo.
Yes.
But the west side of Albuquerque is maybe 25-30% of the district. So how do you characterize the Hispanic population on the west side?
Yeah. So that is very, very dense. And I think they would maybe not identify as living in like a traditional sort of Latino community. I think people think of the South Valley as like a traditional Latino community and they feel like they live in a suburb, you know, but it is very dense and it is very heavily Latino. Like when you look up the most Latino zip codes in Bernalillo, they're all on the west side. So I think it's kind of sneaky. I don't think people realize like just how Latino it is and how dense it is. So, you know, I would think of it as sort of suburban and having those issues, but I would also treat it sort of by and large as a sort of Latino area in the district. It is densely Latino as well.
But more middle class?
More middle class, yes. I would say, and not necessarily middle class, but I think different types of jobs. Like there are people who are, it's a little easier to commute into the city, right? And so there are sort of more office jobs and desk jobs than you'll probably get in the South Valley. Not that nobody in the South Valley is commuting into the city. Of course they are, but you know, I think you see more of the sort of commuting and like office type jobs more so.
Yeah. Anybody, you know, I'm just kind of going back. I have two screens, so I have to go back and forth to see. Oh, wait, I did see a hand somewhere. Hold on. It was on my other screen. It was
Rochelle.
Oh, Rochelle.
Michelle, I noticed that you're using the word Latino and most of us are using the word Hispanic, and can you just talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, you should use the word Hispanic. We've done polling showing that most people in New Mexico use the term Hispanic over Latino. So I think that that is the term that they're using in the communities, and I would use Hispanic. Latino is just sort of what rolls off the tongue for me, but yes, don't listen to me in terms of that.
Yeah. When you were sharing your insights with our messaging committee, you had some interesting thoughts about gender differences. Can you touch on
Yeah.
that?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. So, Latino men, I think there's been a lot in the news about how they are, and sort of this is with men across the board, not just Latino men. Men are sort of trending away from the Democratic Party. We still win Latino men, not white men, but Latino men. But there has been a sort of steady trend away from Democrats, and I think a lot of that is economic based. They just really do trust Republicans more on the economy, which is again why I think we need to keep it like relevant to New Mexico, because we don't want to fall into those categories of like Democrat and Republican, like that fight, because it just makes it harder for us. But I think what is also really interesting is that women, specifically Latinas, Hispanic women, do tend to be a little bit more swingy. They're making up their minds late in a lot of cases, and they just sort of end up with Democrats more and agree with Democrats more. But I wouldn't sort of take them out of the persuasion universe. I would still think of them as persuadable because they are sort of going back and forth. They tend to land with Democrats. And so sometimes you can even get sort of more bang for your buck talking to Latinas. I am partial to Latinas, so excuse me, but you know, they are sort of more open to our persuasion, but you know, obviously we still have to persuade both, but I would certainly consider them part of the persuasion universe as well. And while men are much more like, you know, and not to say that they're one issue voters, they care about a lot of things, but they're very heavy on the economics piece, whereas you know, this is women in general, not just Latinas, but women in general obviously care about how much groceries cost and that sort of thing, but they also are worried about healthcare and some of the sort of more social issues more so than men as well.
Okay, thank you. Because the clock is ticking. Any other questions that anybody might have for Michelle? Yes,
Okay.
Lonnie and unmute yourself.
Okay. I'm wondering how all of the cuts across the board and all of the actions of the Trump administration might be changing so many of these indicators. It just seems like the economy, I mean, he's slashing everything. So how are you looking at that?
Yes, from your mouth to, you know, the voters' ears, I hope. But you know, what I've seen is there is some sort of buyer's remorse with Trump voters. They still think like, oh, he has some good ideas, and I think they still probably would trust him more than Harris on the economy, but they do not like the way he's going about it, and they do not like tariffs. Most people think that that is not helpful. They don't want to see prices go up. They're not prepared to pay more. Like when he says, you know, it's going to be short-term pain because we got to turn this country around. Like they don't want that. They don't want to see prices go up. There is some fear and tension there. But right now that's what it is. And until they really start to feel it, you know, we don't see it as much. But I will say, so right now coffee is at an all-time high. I think it's like $7 a pound, which is like twice what it was last year at this time or something like that, or close to it. And you know, coffee is something that we have to import. We cannot really grow it commercially in the United States. We grow some in Hawaii. It's a little bit possible in Puerto Rico, but we cannot grow enough to like sustain it here. We have to import it, and we have these high tariffs on it, and it is driving the price of coffee up. And like, you know, like basically every American drinks a cup of coffee in the morning, and the price of that is going up. And so I've actually been pushing the Democratic Party to try to get some stories written about that, and really make sure that people understand that, like, when they're buying that cup of coffee in the morning and it's more expensive, that there's political action behind it. So I think we really have to sort of connect those dots for people, because I think you're right. That is, them feeling that is what will help us for sure.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Michelle. And let's turn it over now. Oh, wait. Oh, Lonnie, you have a follow-up there?
Yeah, just one more thing. It seems that healthcare is a big issue too.
Yes.
You know, the cost of healthcare, people losing their healthcare.
Yes. I think people losing their healthcare, particularly in New Mexico, you know, a lot of people are on Medicaid and Medicare, and I think something like 40% of babies born in New Mexico are Medicaid babies. Like, it is something that I think is going to be felt, and we, again, really just need to be clear on that message with people, and sort of driving it home with people. You know, I think healthcare could really be an opening. The other thing is, you know, cuts to the VA, like not giving our veterans the benefits that they frankly fought for, right? I think that is a big one, particularly in this district as well. There's obviously military bases, there's retired military in this district. The VA cuts will really hurt our veterans in this district.
Okay. Any last, let me just switch pages just to make sure nobody's on the other page here with the hand up. No, I don't see anyone. So let's turn it over to Amanda. Amanda Lopez Askin is a Democrat who is the county clerk in Doña Ana County. And there are a few people I know on the call who live in that county, but really this group is from all over the state. And for some of us in northern New Mexico, it's really foreign territory. I know there are big differences between northern and southern New Mexico that we don't always appreciate. She will be running for Secretary of State. Maggie can't run again. She's term limited. And I think one of the interesting things, and something I once heard from a speech that Maggie Toulouse-Oliver gave, is that the role of being an elections official has changed dramatically over the past decade. You used to just sort of be, I almost think of it like the high school student council secretary. You just organized everything. But now it is sort of like central to the integrity of democracy. Protecting, you know, both convincing people that our elections are fair and making sure that they're fair. And so I think the nature of the job has changed considerably. So I'm wondering if you could touch on that a little bit, and then just tell us all about Doña Ana County, if you could. Thank you, Amanda.
Hi, everyone. Amanda Lopez Askin, very proud to be the Doña Ana County Clerk and represent our beautiful borderlands. So some of you I'm very fortunate, I know well and have met many times, but for those of you who haven't met, it's very nice to see you on a Thursday night. I say see you loosely, but you're talking almost my love language when you start talking about the electorate and kind of going into the granulars. I think that is fascinating. I could be here for hours and just kind of go into different subgroups. So I kind of love that these questions are so meaty, because we don't always get that, I think. So you guys are obviously really pointedly, and CD2 is kind of how the story of me being clerk began. And so I won't go granular in that, but what I will tell you is and for those of you who've worked in higher ed, you're going to laugh at this, but I was actually going to be a professor. I'd gone back to school and earned my PhD in 2016. But for those of you who have worked in academia, when I say that, I always say, like, academia was a little too brutal for me, so I came to work in politics, and that continues to be true. But what I will say is I didn't know what I was getting into. So when you talk about it changing, you're absolutely correct. And if you see my 9-year-old walk across here, bear with me. She's been off of school all day, and she's kind of, okay. Sorry, she's waiting. I mean, she knows all about the electorate at this point. But so I actually was appointed in 2018, and I really love the idea of CD2 being part of the beginning of my story as a clerk, because it really is a story. And so I will tell you is I knew that I was an active voter. I was an active Democrat. I really believe participation and representation was integral to basically getting the community that we deserve. So when I put my name in the hat to be appointed as clerk, because the previous clerk had resigned, the commission, I think they thought me as more of a safe Democrat because I hadn't been controversial. And little did they know that a month or two later that the 2018 election in CD2 would happen. And so for those of you who weren't here in 2018, what is fascinating about 2018, because I wanted to understand why it came out the way it is, and this may help you in your endeavors. So what I knew was that it was going to be a big election. It was basically the midterms. And at that point, I started 5 days after the 5 days before the election started in 2018. And those of you who worked elections in any area know that we start months in advance preparing for an election. And so what was in place, what was in place. But at the end of the day, I chose to take the job. So I had to stand in front of everything that happened. Election night, some of you may recall, and I recall this vividly, Yvette Herald declared herself the winner on election night in 2018. And we had not, as a county, we did not have the staffing or the election officials to qualify and process and count, right? There's this huge process involved, the absentee ballots. So absentee ballots will forever be two words that will always remind me of 2018, and wonderful in both terrible ways in a sense. But what happened that year, I learned later, was that there was a very specific groups that spent a lot of time sending applications, taking applications to voters who didn't necessarily vote in midterms. And so at an average in Doñana, when I looked at the data later, and I'm a data person, we noted that there was between 2,000 and 3,000 applications generally for midterms. There was almost 13,000. So note that, this is, I think, really important. It was almost 13,000 applications. We had a little under 9,000 returned. So if you look at that huge breadth between those two, I understood why they were so severely understaffed. I also knew that the process of getting voter registrations was very, very tedious. And so a lot of the staff was working mandatory overtime. There's a lot of reasons why it happened the way it did. But on election night, we knew that there was 8,000 outstanding ballots that needed to be processed, qualified, and counted. And again, that does take time. And we had 7 election officials, and the majority of them were over the age of 65. They had already worked 16, 17 hours. We sent them home that night. And again, new clerk. And this is where Maggie Tulisaller has been an amazing mentor and friend. She worked with me hand in hand that evening and beyond to this day to offer her support and kind of what she would do. Ultimately, it was my decision, but I obviously took her advice. And basically, we appointed 10 election officials the next day, and we counted the rest of the ballots. And I believe Sochi ended up winning by a little over 2,200. And we did count all the ballots, and that became a story. So not only am I talking about CD2 and some of the details as to how it happened, how it did, but I also wanted to talk about the role of an election official and why it changed. So in 2020 is when I think people became more aware. We had the election deniers, we had a lot of the threats and the violence, and I dealt with all of that in 2018. So when 2020 came around, unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, I was probably one of the clerks that was the most prepared to deal with the naysayers, the public comment that would sometimes last for hours on end, calling me a Soros-funded baby killer that was a fraud, and I took the ballots home. I mean, you name it, it went on and on and on. But what I really did at that point was I invested in learning about elections and how New Mexicans and how New Mexico administered our elections. And what I found was everybody should feel so proud of how we administer elections in our state. We should feel proud about how we implement best practices. We're not on a lot of top lists in our country, right? We can think of child welfare, our economics. We can think of healthcare, mental health, all of these systems. but we do elections really, really well. So much so that MIT has ranked us #1 in election administration in their very nonpartisan think tank organization. So, you know, I wanted to start off by saying, like, CD2 is part of this, my story of becoming a clerk. It's part of the reason that I have really wanted to understand our electorate and kind of those granular details that you all have touched on, as well as explain kind of what, from my research at the time, really delved into why we shifted dramatically in terms of not only turnout, but also results, right? And so unfortunately that was flipped the next year, but here we are, and now two consecutive wins for Gabe Vasquez. So it has been the honor of my lifetime, besides being a mom to this one who's wandering behind me, to serve my county in this way. I was born and raised in Las Cruces. I'm from the borderlands. When we talk about Hispanic, Latino, I'm with Michelle. I say Latina, but that's basically, and that's shifted. I used to call myself Mexican, and then I called myself Hispanic. And now for me, the term Latina is it's a political term. It's almost a cry to, it's like a call to action for myself. It is an identity that's seen as something that's doing and moving forward, versus to me, which is Hispanic, which is much more frankly, you know, whitewashed, and it's acceptable to all people. And that's not to say that I don't use it as well, but it seems to be something that's a little more, less controversial than Latina sometimes. And I think Michelle's right. I think for the most part, if we want our electorate to tune in, they understand that the best. But I can kind of tell you from my experience in working in the borderlands and being born and raised here, what that encompasses. So I would love to talk to you or answer any questions connected specifically to our county, and because it's, again, one of my pride and joys.
Yeah. Well, I think one of our issues as an organization is concern about turnout in Doñana. Turnout was low, I believe, and do you have some understanding of why that happened?
So turnout has been stagnant. I think, you know, one of the things that when I began as clerk, again, being somebody who collects data and tries to make decisions based specifically, that's based in that. One of the things we did was develop strong relationships with all of our school systems. So we are able to literally touch every high school senior before they graduate to talk not just about voter registration, because we have automatic voter registration when they get their driver's license, you know, they click the box or they don't. But what we also need that participation. It's fine to register to vote, but the question is are you, you know, are you actually participating? Are you voting? And one of the things that I discovered when I became clerk is that I always was very much against open primaries, because I thought, well, you pick a side, and then within your side, you decide who's going to be in its nominating process. But what happened was, I started working directly with young people in schools and asking them questions, and being in a very nonpartisan, even way, when you register voters, as you all probably know, you cannot influence them either way. So gathering their information and thoughts at the time would discover that they were disillusioned, they were discouraged about kind of the public constant battle and the narratives that were happening. They have unprecedented access to information. I didn't have that. I mean, I'm 51 years old. I did not have access to the information when I was that age. And, you know, 20 years ago, we didn't have it. So they're discovering things in real time. And some of them may not have the literacy to work through many of those, the details of them. But what I find is they are disillusioned, and they don't believe that they fit under any specific party platform. They like this idea of independence. They like this idea of being basically not with the establishment. Secondarily to that, and talking about the electorate beyond young people and their participation rate, which is dismal. What I would say is, you know, my stylist that she does my hair, she's never voted. And I'm fascinated by that. And so I will continue to ask her, you know, we're working on creating some kind of, you know, kind of work group to get these ideas of why. And beyond there's a malaise, I think, that comes with like this, looking at the political environment. The people are just tired of it. They just want to work and do but also beyond that, this feeling that not even that their vote doesn't count, but even if it did count, would things really change? And so I think that continues to be an issue. I also think that many of the election deniers and the narratives that have come out about election have been more successful than we think they have. So everyone here, you're actively a Democrat, you are organizing, you are discussing, you're planning, you can do all of these things connected to the election. And I think that, so I'm not worried about whether you're voting, I know you are. But the narrative that comes out through many of the election deniers reaches people in that gray area. The gray area that maybe, maybe they were thinking of registering to vote, or maybe they registered to vote, they were actually going to vote this time. So that's why it's important as election officials that anytime we find a narrative that is incorrect, that is like malinformation, which is specifically meant to stop people from voting, especially if they're from a specific demographic, is that we take it on, we challenge it, and we give them truth. So when I first started as clerk, what I would do is I don't want to feed the fire. I don't want to get up there and rebut what they're saying at these commission meetings or in the newspaper, because I don't want to create more of a story. And that story will blow up, and then it'll start again, right? Then election headline, Doñana County Clerk, fraudulent, whatever. I've had many of those, unfortunately. But what I would say is I started to speak out against them at commission meetings. And I tried to do it in a way that was appropriate and was respectful of them as a constituent, as a fellow Doñana, as a fellow New Mexican. But I also wanted to offer information for those in the gray area that maybe are getting a little hopeful, that they hear me when I say we are #1 in election administration. We may not do some things that in terms of lists where we're still working on them, but this one, we're doing this right. We have the best practices in place. We are putting our money where our mouths is. Every single clerk, regardless of party affiliation, there's 33 of us. They believe in their communities. They're elected from their communities. They're doing the best they can to administer elections for their communities in a way that engages. And so to fight that narrative consistently, I'll use the top 3 that come up. We are paper ballots. We need to go back to paper ballots. Well, y'all have voted, you're using a hand-marked paper ballot, and that we should always use those. That's the gold standard, because you can always recreate a single election, a single race, or an entire election. So that we should always insist on those. And I'm happy that we veered off that many years ago, and we've continued to stay on the paper ballots. Another is the machines, right? The machines, a constant narrative. We have a testing process that is open to the public, that is verified. The machines are sealed. I go into the weeds of how that works, and I invite them to join us for this public process where we zero out the machines, and they, every iteration of every ballot is included and through every machine and counted. And if there is something amiss, then we would know about it right away, as well as the auditing process. There's so many layers of accountability built into our elections that it would literally be next to impossible to influence or to switch any kind of vote, one vote, much less a whole host of votes to affect a race. Those are the ones that I continue to get, although, that I'm a Democrat, and I'm, there are races that have been won that I was very unhappy about, but the voters spoke, and I respected that decision, and I had to move on just like the rest of us did. And that is my job. It is not to basically say, I have any kind of influence other than administering a darn good election. My first election was the 2018 CD2 race. My second election was the 1st and 13th in the country, but second in our state, ranked choice voting that the city of Las Cruces chose to administer their elections through. So that was my second one. And my third and my fourth were during COVID. So to say that we have been through it in Doñana County, and we have fought the battles, and we had to take all of those things on, is absolutely accurate. And so the idea that, we need to really be thoughtful about what's coming up for Democrats and Congressional District 2. I think it's awesome that you all are meeting and strategizing and wanting to understand the electorate, because that's the only way we can shift. If we're at a 5 and you want to be at a 10, we got to work toward a 6. And then maybe we can work toward a 6.5, and then we can get better and better. But I think that's what this exactly what is helpful for.
Okay, thank you. Janet, you have your hand up.
Yes, a lot of people bemoan the fact that New Mexico is way down in rankings on a lot of subjects, but in elections, I'm proud to say that I worked for a company funded by the Carter Center that
Oh.
picked New Mexico to study the elections because they did it so right. And the report just came out a couple weeks ago of what all the things that we studied all through the state, and it was raving about everything. And I know that Amanda did an excellent job, and I hate to see that she's moving on. But New Mexico is known through the political areas that they do have a very, very little fraud or ineligible voters or anything.
Mm.
And I will say, Observe, I think it's called Observe. The Carter Center has done exemplary work, and there's not many leaders that I admire more than, you know, President Carter. May he literally rest in peace, because Lord knows he.
Right.
But what I will say is, when we had a debrief, because they did observe our elections very closely and work with us closely. And during the debrief, I just, you know, for me, sometimes I'm a bottom line person, like show me the bit, you know, just, and they said, it's actually great news if you're not really that featured that highly in the report. It basically means you did a lot of things correct. And so that was actually kind of good news for us. But it was a pleasure to work with them. And I think those kind of organizations that are nonpartisan, that are giving helpful feedback to each of the counties are invaluable, because that's not something we can fund. I mean, we need those.
Right. We weren't even allowed to say that we were what we were registered as at all.
Oh,
Workers.
very nice. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah. David, you have a question for us? Unmute yourself.
Yeah, do you have any comments on the same-day voter registration? That seemed to be an area that was sort of a sticking point, let's put it that way, with our current system.
Yes.
Thank you.
I would say yes and yes, but I know you definitely want more. So, you know, I think that the infrastructure that same-day registration requires to make it quick and efficient is still struggling to kind of stabilize. It really is a technology issue. So the process is, if a voter has never registered before, they have to have enhanced requirements connected to their residency, and they have to have that government ID. You know, voter ID is a huge controversial issue. And I always say to people, we have voter ID in New Mexico. This idea that we don't is just incorrect. People have to identify themselves when they register, when they apply for an absentee ballot or to vote by mail. We must verify their information just like you do at the polling location with information specific to them. But they do have to bring those enhanced requirements. So that's a little bit of a time, obviously. But what happens is, when it goes into the system, you know, David, if you put your information in the system, you've never registered to vote, we would grab your identifiers, which include your social security number, which is very helpful. And we're one of the few states that use that. And we loop into state systems, right? And once we loop into the state system and confirm, however we're able to confirm, then it goes into a queue to the Secretary of State's office. So it's a process that is it's time consuming, and it's not efficient enough. And that's something that we do need to work on. It's something we have to say, like, yes, we know this is a problem. Yes, we understand that it creates barriers. And yes, we need to do everything we can to reduce that, including additional funding, which will help. You know, sometimes money can solve problems. And that would be one situation where we had a more efficient system and more technology and more hands on deck, that it would be less time consuming. One of the things I also tell voters is, if you're waiting to register to vote, I mean, if you're waiting to register to vote until election day, unfortunately, you may have to wait a bit. Now, it's unacceptable to wait hours on end. Let's be clear. Like, absolutely unacceptable. We should do better, and we can do better, right? But it's still relatively new. And I think we continue every election to go, okay, we need to do this differently next time. And one thing that we knew after the first time we did SDR was that a lot of people were unnecessarily waiting and putting their information in and thinking that they needed to do that. And that was a training issue for election officials. They were sending them to do things that was probably unnecessary at the time. So yes, it's a problem. Yes, it needs to be addressed. we need to holistically encourage people to vote as early as possible so election day doesn't end up being a cluster. But at the end of the day, it's not acceptable for people to have to wait hours to vote. I mean, nothing keeps me up at night than seeing Corbett Center, which is our student union here in New Mexico State, where young people are waiting hours on end, or to get a call from a mom in Albuquerque who sent her child to vote and said they left discouraged. I mean, those literally are the things that I think, how can we fix this? So we're actively working on it, I think, in every single county. And I know we're working with Secretary of State's office, and we hope to get it improved every election to where it is just that slight wait, which is expected, but reasonable.
That I see, I do most of the data analytics for Blue CD2, and I've worked a lot with the Secretary of State's office, trying to get data and election data. And you're headed up there, and you know, we certainly hope you win. But I'm just curious, you know, having worked in Doña Ana as county clerk, you probably understand why, but I've never been able to figure it out. It costs, like, for CD2 for our counties, it costs us about $380 to get the early vote 3 times a day for however many, you know, days it is once the election starts, you know, early voting starts. And then when it's time for same day vote, it's like $1,800, and it takes 6 weeks to get the data. I don't understand why that is, but I'm, you know, it's kind of my pet peeve. I'm just kind of hoping that that's something that you could look into. And another thing I'd like to see is better access to your office so that we can get questions answered.
You say our office in Doña Ana or at Secretary of State's office?
Secretary of State.
I appreciate your optimism, Glenn, to be clear. So from your mouth to the universe. But what I will say is, you're giving me, you're absolutely had no idea that it costs that much in either the, you know, the daily mailer. And I had no idea that there was a delay or it costs that much for SDR. I had no idea. So this is good information for me to take in and try to understand that, why that is. I will tell you, a lot of our data in Doña Ana County, and there's a lot of reasons why. It's not just because I'm trying to be altruistic, but it's easier just to give data to people free than to do this whole processing of, you know, $25 here and $25 here. Not that it's not important, and not that we couldn't use it, but at the end of the day, I think as long as they're under the confines of being a candidate and or working a campaign or election or somehow involved, I think that's sufficient, and there's not a lot of it. So I would be interested in looking at the fees and how they're embedded in state statute and doing, I think, what is fair for everyone, of course, all the parties, and to maybe talk about like how that plays out and if there could be an improvement in the customer service you're getting. Because at the end of the day, it really comes down to customer service. You're seeking something, paying a fee for it, and I don't think it's unreasonable to ask for something for less than 6 weeks. So and I'll find out why. That's a great question, and I will definitely note that when I ask, when I do talk to the staff there who has been helpful for us. I do know since COVID that I have heard that there's a perception that there's more barriers to connect directly with them. So that's definitely noted. So thank you.
Well.
Yeah, thank you. I wish I had an answer to say, this is the answer and this is how I will solve it. But I will say, it's good information to have. Now I have to figure out and I have to do the work.
Well, I just wanted to make you aware of it. It's kind of frustrating for us down here trying to give answers to people like in this group that want to know like what's happening. I can't tell you.
Well, and Glenn, I'm especially sensitive to when people say down here, because I'm down here too, right? And so I think there's an idea sometimes that everything in the hub is in Bernalillo and Santa Fe. So we talk about our electorate and they say, oh, let's look at this county. Well, Santa Fe, they're ideal in this ways. And I'm like, but that's not a snapshot of New Mexico. If we're looking at what snapshots are, we're probably looking more at Doña Ana and counties like ours. So this is good feedback for sure. Thank you.
Great. Anybody else out there with a question? Because we're kind of just a little bit over time. Yes, Lonnie Ann, unmute yourself, please. Nope, you're still muted, Lonnie Ann.
And while she's unmuting, I will say, Vicky, I think asked, do we expect ETS to increase even by 2026 primaries and election? You know, I would say, I would think it's probably plateaued and stabilized a bit. I wouldn't be surprised if there's maybe a 0.5% in bump, but I don't see a huge sweep at this point if they haven't already done it. But I've been wrong before, and I'm sure it's going to happen again. So.
Yeah, Lonnie Ann, go ahead. And then I
Yes,
have a quick question too.
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was in Slate, but there was an article yesterday that was very, very detailed, talking about how Starlink, and I don't know if it was Leonard Leo, but there were a lot of people, high-tech people involved, that came up with a way, according to this article, that they were able to get into voting machines, and there was no way auditors could detect it. And I just wonder if anybody else read that. And I think, you know, I assume that there was a lot of truth to that, and I don't want it to be a, you know, whatever falsehoods, but as technology gets more sophisticated, I do think that that can be a real issue, and it can also be, as you said, a lot of people feel turned off to vote, like the vote doesn't even count literally.
Well, I'm going to circle back to this idea of hand-marked paper ballots, right? So that's why if ever it becomes truly this issue where there is a race that's contested, that's why we have secure warehouses. That's why they are protected from fire and flood and alarms and, you know, all the video, because those ballots are invaluable when it comes to recreating races. And so I think there's that, but we also have to not tune out what we don't want to hear, because it's not maybe within our narrative. So I think it's smart to follow those stories. I think it's smart to take that information in and also be able to counter other narratives. So I think that's, I always say, like, when somebody approaches me with, hey, so this is going on, and they're absolutely dug in. I always say, like, I'm not closed to this idea of something is amiss. I can't be. But show me, tell me, and let's figure it out, because I am in charge of elections in Doñana County. There's nobody that wants to get to the bottom of it more than I do. We don't want to hide. We have nothing to hide. If there is something amiss, show us. Let's all figure it out. In theory, we're all in this together. And if you find something and you know something, and I'm not helping you, then you should go to the Attorney General. You should go to the Secretary of State's office. You should go to law enforcement. There are routes to do this. So if that continues to be a narrative and it continues to be something that is quote unquote proven, I don't know, anybody knew, I think it's Bill Belichick was the coach that said, show me the baby. Like, you can tell me about the labor and all the narrative, but at the end of the day, I want to see what it actually, the proof is, which is kind of the baby, so we call it, right? And I'm open to it if I should say I'm open to it, and then we would go from there. So I think it's good to monitor and to be able to recognize those arguments are coming and those accusations are coming. We have to get ahead of those and have a narrative, I think, collectively as a party that is rooted in transparency, and community people understanding what's going on, so they can also advocate and give this true narrative, but also be open to the idea that there are some times that we may have to address things that we don't want to.
Yeah, Michelle, unmute Michelle.
I'm sorry to ask you a question, but I'm actually just wondering, Amanda, if you could talk to us about your podcast, because I listen to it all the time and I think you should pitch it, because I think people should listen to it.
So one of the things that I just go, so people ask me, like, how do we get people more engaged, right? How do we get people more? And I say, Michelle, and I think you touched on this, and I don't know if you know this, Michelle is a nationally known award-winning pollster. So I take everything she says and I try to absorb it when I am talking to anybody who is curious about voting or on the fence about voting. But one of the ways that we discovered is all the ways. There is no singular way to reach all the voters. What I know is that we needed to have, I hired an intern who was going to leave our office, and his dream was to work in media. And I literally woke up at 4 a.m. saying, we should hire Jacob. We should hire Jacob. Jacob, if you don't follow any other socials, please follow Doñana County Clerk's office, because not only do we have all of the socials, Instagram, of course, Facebook, we also have a TikTok page. We also have a YouTube channel where we offer information, but our podcast is something people can pop in when they're cleaning. They can, when they're on the way to pick up their kiddo, like I do sometimes, I listen to our podcast, and we talk about all the things electorate. We talk to different types of voters. We talk about the history of Doñana County. So of course I'm going to promote it. Please look up the Doñana County Clerk's office. And our moniker is Preserving History and Democracy, which I really think captures what we do as clerks, because we are the record keepers, and we're also obviously in charge of administering elections. So please find us. If you have an idea, we would love to have you as a guest. If you're a subject matter expert or would love to explore something, we would love to have you. I think it's very community based and embedded, and that's what makes it so fun to listen to.
Okay. And then something you touched on, but I just want to make it really clear that so people understand, because people are getting their voter registration when they go to get their driver's licenses at 15, 16, just all the teenagers in 2026 will be, or most of them will be registered to vote, correct?
Well, if they meet the requirements at the time of registration, as the time of their driver's license. So in New Mexico, we're one of the few states that you are able to vote at 17 in the primary, right? If you'll be 18 by the general, because we think of the election as like kind of a continual. It's not just one, it's not just the primary, it's a continuation. So if you are going, kind of the general seals the deal. So if they meet those requirements of age, they can click the box and it will move them forward in terms of registering to vote. So if they're 16, when they get, they're not going to be registered to vote. That's not an option for them, because they have to be 18. Of course, they have to have their residency, as well as they have to have the citizenship that they attest to under a 4th degree felony. So yeah, they are going to be there, but the ones that are of age, I hope they're gearing up for 2026, and I hope they are tuning into a lot of the correct narrative. And that's part of like our job as clerks, not just mine and Doñana, but is to connect with them and make this real and, humanize elections and in some level politics.
So we do still have to pay attention to registering high school students, because they may have gotten their licenses when they were 16.
Yes.
Okay. And Rochelle, you have a question.
Touch every single one. That's why we literally go to every single senior class, and a senior does not leave Doñana County without me or one of my team members having gone into their classroom when they're a senior and saying, hey, this is what voting is about, kind of a thing. Yeah. That'd be great if we could do that statewide, frankly. Yeah, it would be lovely. Okay, and Rochelle, and then we'll wind it up, I think.
I just want to thank you so much for talking with us. It was so informative. And we have made a little inroad into podcasting and would love to interview you. So
I would love that. And I will tell you, the first media I ever did was I did talk radio in 2007 and on health topics, because I worked with the Department of Health. And at first I was so self-conscious, but at the end I'm like, you know what? I am who I am. And if you like me in person, you'll probably like my radio. And so it really is one of the best mediums, because nobody cares what you look like. Nobody cares. You just like are talking, and it is awesome. So I would love to be, and I'd love to have you all.
Well, thanks. And I'm just so thrilled to know that you go into the classroom of all the high school students and
they're energizing. I say the why. Often when I talk about my campaign, I point to this one as being the why, but the bigger picture why is when I go in those high schools and I see those young people, they're hopeful, they want to believe, they want to feel like they count and that they matter. And so I do everything I can to tell them that they do, so thank you.
I know we're out of time, but that just brings up one more question. I've been reading a Democratic strategist who's talking about that issue of trust and how that's really an important issue. That's what it's what we want to do with our vote, is to trust that person that we're voting for to act on our behalf. And I think those things are worth talking about. Yes, we need to talk about economics, but we also need to talk about these deeper reasons for voting.
Well, and Rochelle, one of the things I will tell you, and I don't need to belabor any topics because I could, like I said, I could be here for hours. But what I will say is, when I first started a clerk and I started being accused of all of these things, I was shaken. I didn't understand. And so what I would tell people is, I was born and raised in this community. I choose to raise my daughter here. My parents live here. I was on the Board of Regents from New Mexico State. I'm a 3-time Aggie. I'm from the borderlands. Why would you think I would commit 8,000 felonies randomly one night? It was really trying to challenge people on that. Like, we've gotten lots of humanity and connection and understanding, and maybe that's because of the screens. It's probably a lot of the reasons, but I agree with you. I think it's important to humanize, and not just, frankly, Democrats, but I think just humanize people who want to lead and help and support.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Michelle and Amanda, thank you so much. We have just learned so much, and we have, as an organization, we have so much to think about and talk through moving forward based on what we've learned tonight. And we really appreciate you taking your time. And everybody, we'll see you next month.
Look forward to meeting you all in person sometime. All right, have a great night.
Thank you
Okay.
so much for having me.